Hi, everyone. My name is Ashish Sharma. I'm co-founder of Prospectus International, an organization based in India which operates in the international education sector. Thank you very much for being with us. This is the first episode of our podcast series called The Big Shift. Our focus is on how different countries and the universities and institutions, and precisely the governments, engage with this country. On our first episode today, I'm very delighted to have one of our colleague and a friend, Mr. Vivek Mansukhani with us. Vivek is head India for Institute of International Education. And, he's a very, very senior professional in the Indian education ecosystem and also international education ecosystem globally. I definitely look up to Vivek quite a lot. He and I know each other for a few years now, and I'm very glad to also mention that Vivek also is a member of our advisory board in the company. So welcome, Vivek. Welcome today to the podcast series.
Thank you, Ashish. Pleasure.
Um, Apart from Vivek's 34 odd years of tenure within international education, he has previously worked for some of the big brands, including the British Council and also Ford Foundation. So let's hear from Vivek what IIE is and what work it is doing currently in India.
So, Institute of International Education, or IIE, is an American-based global nonprofit which was set up in 1919. So we are 106 years old. We've been registered in the US as a not-for-profit entity, and our main work is in the area of international education exchange. So we've been running various programs and projects on behalf of various sponsors and donors for the last 100 plus years. These include governments, corporates, foundations, philanthropies. So we manage large-scale scholarships and fellowship programs for these donors, including the Fulbright program, the Gilbert program, and so on. We also work in the areas of connecting international partners, such as universities, US universities with universities in other countries. We bring down delegations from the US to India, from India to the US, and pretty much we advise governments and other stakeholders on issues related to international higher education policy and practices. So that's what we've been doing. In India, we've been around for 20 years. This is actually our 20th anniversary year. Again, we manage a number of scholarship programs for Indian students. We also advise both American and Indian universities on how to partner with one another. And as you mentioned earlier, our open doors data, we track international student mobility trends by gathering all the relevant data from the right sources.
Thanks, Vivek. As you have touched on open doors data already, let's talk about that report because I think that you come up with the report nearly every year. And this has been happening for the last many, many years now as well. Can you please tell us about the relevance of the report in the international education sector?
So IIE has been tracking international student mobility since 1920, but about 75 years ago, more officially through a channel called the Open Doors Report, which is funded by the US government, State Department, or the ECA. So they have been funding this program, but IIE has been taking the lead on gathering data from US universities about students from every single country coming to study each year in the US. And from the US, of course, looking at study abroad, American students going outside to study. So over the years, this has become like a kind of very reference point for all international organizations across the world to be used as solid data to sort of indicate trends of international student mobility, both to the US and outside the US. So this is normally released each year in the month of November. The data is revealed at that time, and the full report is normally available in the month of February. So this is a kind of something that everybody looks up to, and everyone knows that IIE is very popular for, the Open Doors report. We also bring out another report called Project Atlas, which tracks student mobility from all other countries and to those other countries. But for this sake, let's stick to Open Doors for our conversation today.
Sure. Thank you, Vivek. Now, talking about the data, which kind of comes up in November, I did look at some of the data, and now you'll be coming up with the full report in February. I think that US is going to be at an all-time high number of international students in the last year. Am I
Yes,
correct?
1.1 million. It's the highest ever.
Right. And which are the top two or three source countries, if you may?
So earlier it used to be China, but in the latest report, which just came out this year, India has overtaken as the number one country. So India is now
Wow.
leading, China comes next, and then there are a whole host of other countries. But India accounts for now almost 20% of the international students going to the US. So it's a significant jump despite the pandemic, despite all other areas. But maybe because of the pandemic as well, the China numbers have probably dropped. But India is definitely number one on the top, and we see that trend going to continue over the next few years.
And from whole of South Asia, is it only India from where the students are going to the US, or is there any other country which is also a major source?
So in recent years, countries like Nepal and Sri Lanka and others have their numbers have also been going up, definitely.
Okay. Let's talk about the big shift which is happening in the US currently. As we know that this week, President Trump is going to kind of get into the office again. What policy changes do you foresee with him coming back to the office?
Yeah, I mean, there are lots of rumors, lots of speculations about what Trump 2.0 is going to look like, whether it's going to be completely negative for international higher education. But I think I'm pretty hopeful. I think that government has learned a lot from its first 4 years. They're coming back after 4 years. And I don't think they want to ruffle feathers dramatically, at least not initially. And I think they value international relations and they value the expertise that international students bring to their home country. I mean, international students contribute almost $50 billion each year to the US economy. So I think it would be very wise to suddenly, shut the doors. Our report is open doors, and I think all US universities have a very open door policy to allow students to come in. And that's one of the reasons US is so popular because it really welcomes students from all over the world and creates kind of an environment where they feel safe, they feel protected, and it celebrates diversity. So I think this government is going to tread cautiously. As far as India is concerned, we know both governments are very well connected, are very friendly. And there's also been a task force that was set up a couple of years ago by the Association of American Universities that's looking at increasing the number of collaborations between US and India in the higher education space. So, I mean, there are all kinds of rumors floating around because, the new government is going to have very strict immigration policies, but I don't think it's going to drastically affect the number of students going into that country, at least not from our part of the world.
Right. Now you have been talking about the Indian students. Let me take the conversation to the, history of Indians going to the US. So, many years ago when I was doing a similar series for Australia, someone from University of Melbourne told us that, it was 1920s when the Indian students started coming to Australia. So how does the history, looks when you're kind of looking at India-US partnership?
I mean, I think it's around the same time, about 100 years ago, is when Indian students started going to the US. And that number has kept rising over the years. In fact, at a certain stage, because the cream of Indian students from the IITs and IIMs would go to the US, we were blamed for a brain drain. It was felt that US was draining all the talent from the US. But and people were not just going to study; they're staying on because there were work opportunities and job opportunities abounding. So over the years, the number of students has increased definitely, and the reasons for that is because US offers such an eclectic background. It offers such amazing cutting edge research, laboratories, educational centers, and diversity of students as well as faculty, that the number has continued to increase despite the presence of other international players, like you mentioned, Australia and Canada and Europe. And so many other smaller countries as well. I think America continues to enjoy that privileged position because of the very size that it has, the geographical size, the fact that it has over 4,000 universities and colleges. So there's so much to choose from. And by and large, so far, all students, have enjoyed a great time there and have been able to stay on and work. So I think an Indian student, particularly, in fact, all students from all over the world, look at that ROI about what am I going to be able to do if I'm spending so much money for 3 or 4 years? How do I quickly pay it back, number one, and how do I get that international experience? So I think one thing that this current new government that you said is taking over will have to ensure that, the OPT, the optional practical training, the H-1B visas, and so on, those continue. So I think India continues to show a definite rise in the number of students, as has been borne out by the latest Open Doors report. And I don't see that dwindling. I mean, there's so much connection with the diaspora. There are so many alumni who've come back to India and who are also promoting their own universities, whether
Yeah.
it's a Harvard, whether it's a Chicago, whether it's a Yale, or indeed community colleges or research institutions. So I think we're pretty much on a win-win wicket here.
Let me just talk to you about a little bit of split in the numbers, if you may. I have been looking at the growth of Indian students to the US, and this last year there has been a growth of postgraduate student numbers by 19%, but undergraduates still grew only by 13%. Do you think that there are some cognizant policy deliberations on the US side not to attract the undergraduate students so much?
No, I don't think that's probably not my analysis of it. My analysis of it is in the last few years, because of the pandemic, a number of the students who were still in school, I don't think their parents or they themselves wanted to go anywhere for undergraduate studies, and particularly not to the US. So there's been a bit of a lower number of undergraduate students going to the US over just the last few years. But the graduate students who have already done their degree are now looking at the job market and are wanting to go abroad for masters. That number has increased tremendously, as you just mentioned, by 19%. But I think it's a matter of a couple of years when the undergraduate numbers will also go up. And the master's students are also looking at OPT, so there's a huge rush towards that. But I think it's going to be a balanced figure coming going forward.
So we spoke about the history and we spoke about the numbers as well. Let me also speak about, or discuss with you a little bit about the perception. When we have been looking at some of the other destinations across the world, there has been, internal discussions within those countries that because the international students are coming to our country, they are taking away our houses, or there has been increase in cost of living or whatever. But when you look at the international student numbers in the US, they stay kind of quite closer to 6% or something.
Mhm.
Um, why haven't we heard such issues from US as a country, uh, you know, kind of international students being blamed for housing crisis or increase in, the cost of living, if you may?
Sure. As you said yourself, I mean, international students, although it's part of the overall in numbers is 1.1 million, they are only 6% of the total intake of students in America, including their domestic students. So that's a very small number. Because of the size of the US and the 50 states, and the fact that it has urban centers, regional towns, smaller cities, it's very well spread out. So there's a very well oiled machinery for the housing infrastructure in place there, both on large campuses as well as off campus housing. So it's a very well oiled mechanism, so to speak. And there has really not been much housing issues. Of course, during the pandemic times, people were not getting homes and so on because of the crisis. But over the years, I think housing hasn't been a problem. And they also don't, the American government and, Education USA and other campaigns don't view foreign students as an intrusion. I mean, there's been that aberration because of the governments looking at Chinese students with a bit of hostility for some time. Hopefully, that will change in the future. But by and large, international students contribute a lot of diversity, especially from India. They add a lot of intellectual capital. A number of students have stayed on. And as you can see from the success stories of all the top tech companies they're headed, the CEOs are Indians. So that's a trend about the Indian students not just going to study for 3 or 4 years, but making the US their home. So, with that kind of rich legacy, I think housing has not been a problem. Also, I think Indian alumni associations and international associations help their students a lot to find, housing and so on if there's a crisis. So, I don't think housing is going to be an issue. There's enough and more to draw from. And there are a lot of systems in place that enable each institution has their SIO, their senior international officers. They have their international student services that provide, amazing services to all their students. I'm sure other countries do too. But as you know, most countries, the total international students could be 25 or 30% of their overall. So that seems to be like, why are our domestic students suffering, whereas international students are getting priority? That kind of conflict so far has not arisen, as far as I know, in the US.
Thank you. Now, from this particular discussion, we want to move to the next point, which is all about US as a study destination for Indian students. Now, whomsoever has, either studied in US or engaged with the US universities, I have been benefited from Harvard Business School as well. I've done an executive education program from them. So for many of us who has been comparatively a little bit more exposed, not significantly, we kind of think about US as the Ivy League universities, right? But apart from Ivy League, there are a number of other universities as well. So the students who are hearing to your talk today, can you just articulate to them about the full value proposition from the US universities and about the universities which are beyond Ivy League as well?
So, as you know, in the US, there are about 4,000 universities and colleges, which is a huge spectrum, which includes the top rated research institutions, community colleges, public colleges, private institutions. And so there's a huge choice for students to choose from, number one. And all these institutions definitely guarantee high quality academic instruction. They have international faculty. They allow students to choose their own electives, be very open in terms of even changing their curriculum and their courses midway. They have state of the art research laboratories. You can start research work from day one. What would take you many years to maybe achieve in India, you can start doing your projects from day one over there. They have funding, they have access to a number of things which, students would struggle back in our country here. So, whether you're looking at a top notch level, because if you have those academic scores and background, or you're looking at something less expensive and something not that competitive, I think the US education experience guarantees a lifelong learning opportunity and something that can be quite transformational. So, I mean, there are agencies like the Education USA, which is the State Department's sort of campaign to promote studying in the US. And officers here and advisors here are available round the clock, free of service, to advise students on which universities to choose and how to go about the process of application. Of course, there are lots of other institutions and agents and others who also represent American universities and also do the same. American colleges themselves come out and talk to people at education fairs and conferences. So I think it's a great opportunity to be able to interact. They're also very open, very sort of efficient at coming back to you with information. So I don't think anyone should have any hesitation about definitely checking out the US as a great option for both undergrad and grad programs, and of course for doctoral and other studies, because it doesn't just stop there.
So from there, let me kind of move you to OPT. As we have seen the data, I think there has been an increase of 41%
Mhm.
of Indian students choosing OPT last year. What does this mean for the students and for the university, and finally for the industry as well?
I think this is a trend that's going to continue because Indian students, particularly from here and of course other parts of the world, are looking for that experience after they graduate. So the fact that US does offer this OPT option, and in fact for STEM students, it's an additional 24 months to continue working and training and working in the kind of industry that you have studied about and getting a job prospect and perhaps the opportunity to also continue working in that country for a much longer time if you do get your H-1B visa. I think that is a huge draw for students, for parents having invested so much money, and the fact that many students want to work for a few years outside of their home country and then come back to India, possibly as entrepreneurs, as people setting up their own businesses with an international network, with enhanced capabilities of operating in the West and bringing those best practices here. So I think for the students and parents, it's a great opportunity, but also for our own economy here in India and for the government, I think it's a great opportunity that these students are going themselves, training themselves and coming back. A number of faculty are coming back to India. The top universities of the world, of India now, the private universities. There are a number of professors and, including heads of these institutions who've trained abroad, a lot of them in the US as well, and bringing back that expertise to India. So, whether it's in academia, whether it's in research, or whether it's in hardcore corporate sector and manufacturing sector and science and technology and artificial intelligence, I think the fact that students are now coming back, it's no longer a brain drain, but it's more like a brain flow. So, that even if they're there, they're able to contribute back to the Indian ecosystem. I think that is something to be appreciated. And the Americans encourage that. They don't insist that they just stay on and work there, but the land is one of opportunities. America has always been seen as a land of big opportunities and dreams. So, as they say, the American dream, I think not just the Americans, but a lot of people do live that American dream.
So you were talking about land of opportunities. Let me ask you this a very direct question. Where do you think, is the growth in the emerging sectors where Indian students who are currently studying in the US or are going to be in the US in the near future, they can land into the jobs before they will think about coming back home?
So, as our open doors data kind of suggests, a number of the popular subjects for Indian students are maths and computer science, engineering, a number of other STEM subjects. STEM is a very, very important part of why Indians go there, followed by things like marketing and business studies. And then you come on to other things like the arts and social sciences and so on. So, with that kind of background, a number of the Indian students are staying on to work in the sort of IT, artificial intelligence, robotics, that kind of sector, which again is going to emerge as something very big for the US and the world. The other areas where they're getting their experiences in the areas of, I think, renewable energy, and that's something that India can use learn a lot from if our own students come back here. There's also a lot happening in the hospitality industry and the health industry. So following the pandemic, they've seen that these are the areas where a lot of training needs to be given, a lot of infrastructure needs to be built, particularly in health and medicine. So I think in medicine and health also students are getting a lot of that OPT experience and probably trying to get some work ex before they come back here and are able to bring their own ideas to their home country.
So you have already articulated on, a number of STEM subjects and finally spoken about the industries as well. Thank you for that. Last question from the data. It's about, I was looking at this one particular metric where the Open Doors report says that 56% of Indian students land in maths or computer science related subjects. Are Indian students different from rest of the world? Or is the demand from India different from rest of the world?
I think for Indian students, STEM is a very big thing. As you know, there's so many engineering programs in our country, and there's such a demand for students to either become doctors or engineers or computer scientists now. So, which is why I think uh, the fact that US offers much higher and advanced training at a master's level, particularly in these areas, is why students, because not everyone can get into an IIT and so on. Not everyone can get into the best engineering college, but with even average scores, you can go to the US and acquire a world class degree. I think it is a bit unique for Indian students trying to go so much in STEM. Other countries are considerably lower in STEM. It's more balanced with the liberal arts, sciences, and medicine studies. But STEM is becoming very popular. STEM, that is science, tech, engineering, mathematics, and medicine. So a number of other countries are also sending students in the STEM areas, particularly from Southeast Asia. But India still continues to dominate the number of STEM students, and particularly those going for maths and computer science and engineering.
Vivek, in the last part of the discussion, I want to kind of, move more towards the India-US partnership. And uh, I'll ask you the first question about students itself. I have also been looking at the study abroad of US students and understand that there has been an increase of 49%, in the last year when, for the students who have been going out. Uh, and then when you look at the top 25 countries where the students go, India does not really fall there. Where do you think work needs to be done to make sure that a larger number of US students land in India as well for study abroad programs?
I mean, that's a very, very pertinent point. In fact, I was just a few days ago in the state of Kerala, where the Kerala State Higher Education Council had invited leaders from around the world and educations from around the world to discuss this very topic. How can they attract more students to the state of Kerala? Given the fact that Kerala has such high literacy, some amazing institutions of higher education, but why is it not happening and what can be done? And the discussions revolve around India needs to really step up its game in promoting what we have out here, promoting our institutions of excellence, promoting our institutes of high standing in the various states. Also, in India, so far, most international students, including from the US, have been coming to do sort of more basic programs like yoga and culture and Hindu tradition and Indian tradition, religion studies, and so on. But nobody necessarily wants to come here for a computer engineering or a maths or a science degree because they're getting those in any case in their part of the world. So what we need to do is there is the Study in India program that is run by the Ministry of Education and EDSIL. I think we've also advised them in the past. They really need to promote India as a land where cutting edge research is being done, where subjects that international students, not just from neighboring countries, can come and study because it's close by and it's cost effective, but even students from the West, from Europe and the US and so on, can come and join these programs because of the experiential learning that they will get here, working on life projects, understanding how a developing country is also collaborating on that. So for the US, the numbers are not very remarkable given the fact that we send 330,000 students each year almost. That's a number, and we have some 3,000 students or that number coming. It's a very dramatic difference. But we at IIE are also working with certain American universities who want to bring their students, whether on faculty-led programs, But we want to see the numbers going up from just these short 2 week, 3 week, and semester long programs to full academic degree programs. That will be when I think we can really say that India is now a solid destination. And our government talks about India being, the leader in education and retaining its old glory as we did in the past. So for that, a lot of sort of combined activity will need to be done. A strategy about study in India. I mean, why is it so attractive? What can people do? There is a Study India portal which I think needs more work and needs definitely more marketing, more publicity, and agencies like ourselves and yours, can be counted upon to help them strategize and to also implement.
And I'm reflecting on one of the conversations which we had about 2 odd years ago, and I used to be in another organization. And I certainly think that a lot of work can be done in that space as well. Very much with you. So while we are talking about mobility of students to India, let's talk about the transnational education. There was a question on the, you know, a big question which I'll keep in the end. Let's talk about transnational education. So a number of Indian universities have now started doing dual degrees and joint degrees. Where do you think the real opportunity is for the Indian institutions and universities to engage with the US universities for dual degrees or joint degrees?
Yeah, I think this is a recent phenomenon, particularly post COVID. I think it's become very, very popular. A number of American universities, including some leading ones, who are looking to increase their numbers, are now not just looking at students coming for a full 4 year degree program or a 2 year degree, a master, 2 year master's degree program, but are looking at these pathways where you can study 2 years in India and then, take a transfer, as it were, to a US university, continue the next 2 years. Some are looking at a 1+1 for a master's. Some are even looking at a combined bachelor's and master's where you do 3.5 here in India and then a 1.5 roughly in the US.
Yeah.
I think it benefits the students definitely because they save a lot of costs in the first year or the 2 years of paying Indian costs, whereas the curriculum is kind of hopefully designed jointly by the US university and the Indian university, and they are prepared by the time they actually get to the US shores. So it's proving to be very popular. It has increased numbers. There are a number of MOUs that have been signed. We are working with a few universities which are also exploring this, as long as the quality from both institutions remains kind of solid and both partners, the faculty, are in kind of sync. Like, for example, if I'm studying here in a maths department and I go there and the maths department faculty is completely a different kind of mindset and comes from a completely different background, it's not going to work. So the MOUs need to be signed with a lot of course curriculum design being at the forefront and kind of tracking the student's journey, how he or she is going to actually get there and be able to cope and then advance to that degree. So I think it's a great economic viable model for students, for parents here, and for international universities like the ones in the US to attract a larger number of student pool also. Not just those who can afford a 4 year degree, but even those who come for part of that time.
Got it.
So I think it's a great model. I know in the UK and other countries, a lot more has been done in TNE, but the US is picking up. In the US, you see, there is no federal system controlling all the universities. So each university takes more time because based on their own resources, their own funding, their own leadership, they take much more time to decide an MOU, whether it's in the area of student mobility or faculty exchange or any other kind of partnership. But I think they're getting there. They're getting wind of the fact that this is happening. We brought down a delegation last year from the US of 17 universities and the leaders of these universities and got them to meet, senior people at the government here and to understand the implications of the NEP 2020 and how internationalization is going to play a big role in the future.
Let me now call the elephant in the room. Are any US universities going to start a campus in India?
What's your guess?
Well, my guess is as good as yours. We are also
Yeah,
working in this space. But I
right.
think that India's, with India's policy, the ecosystem within one can work. I think it makes it a very, very valuable proposition. We have been working in this space. We also have been thinking how we can bring the foreign universities from
Sure.
outside India, help them to establish their base here in India and start small, but over a period of time, grow bigger. And our focus is not to just teach students bachelor degrees, but also to engage with the industry so that the industry get the talent,
Mhm.
and finally to work in the joint research areas as well, if you may.
Sure.
Um, but over to you. What do you
Yeah.
think is
No,
going to be the future in this space?
yeah, no, Ashish, I think that would be great. It's an ideal situation to be in. Um, And there have been branch campuses from other countries that are already in the offing or have opened up. But I think US tends to tread more cautiously because it is private money of that institution. So it depends on the leaderships. We really have to influence the leaders of those institutions, that universities, to take that big risk in a relatively unknown country for them, and where unfortunately the bureaucratic systems take a lot of time. I know there are a number of rules and regulations that have been passed, but that also takes a lot of time. But the biggest missing factor is there are no economic incentives at the moment for international universities to come here. For example, when New York University opened in Abu Dhabi, the Abu Dhabi government opened up, gave them free land, gave them money. They're still supporting scholarships. So I think if India can up its game a little bit by also offering some financial investment in some of these in some way, then the big fat campuses will come here. Otherwise, it'll continue to be smaller programs, some projects, research centers, opening university offices, and so on. But anything can happen. I think the government is keen here to expand, to make India an international hub for higher education. So it'll be a long step forward if international branch campuses are set up here. But in my conversations so far, the US universities are kind of waiting and watching to see what some of the other players are doing, learning from them. But in the meanwhile, research activity continues, joint research programs, faculty exchanges, and so on. So I think it's a stepping stone towards IBCs coming into India from the US as well.
Although this is not to pitch our company here, but we have been, as I've been telling you, that we have been working in this space. We have built a business case on how a foreign university can come and set up in India. We also have been working with some of the state governments where we are picking up the information on what incentives can be provided to the universities. So if you ever feel like the universities want to know more about that, we'll be just a
Hmm.
call away. But
Sure.
back to again the agenda. Let's talk about the research academies. And I'll kind of start from 1990s, where India used to have only about 100 odd research labs, if you may. Uh, and the data which I see about 2 odd years ago was about 2,100 plus uh, research centers in India, and many of those centers were supported by the industry as well. What do you think can be an opportunity between US research institutions or a university and Indian Research Center, which will be backed by the industry, if you may?
Yeah. So I think that, as I mentioned maybe before, that's something that AAU, the Association of American Universities, set up a task force to kind of promote joint research, not just between universities, but also research centers in the US and here. And yes,
Yeah.
always working with a university partner, a research partner, and a kind of company or a corporate partner, or the industry sector is very, very important. I think a number of initiatives have already been signed. And India certainly looks to the US for cutting edge research and taking their guidance and working along with them. Indian scientists and others who have, as you know, have gone and settled there are advising the US government. So it'd be great if they can also work on joint projects back home because they understand the Indian reality because they were born and brought up here and they understand the lay of the land. So I think a lot can be done, which is reciprocal and benefits both countries. But the Indian government perhaps could be a little more explicit about what funding is available for research projects from our own kind of coffers. So the National
Yeah.
Research Fund and so on, that set aside some 50 billion rupees or dollars, I'm not sure what. How does one access that? I mean, that's a question that some US universities keep asking us. Like, if this money is available, how do we access it? Is there an application process? So again, like the Study in India program, I think if we can be a little bit more clear about where people can look for funding, what is available. I know there are lots of things. There are some programs like the Spark and Yan, which allow scientists to come here on fellowships. Again, I don't think all of them are used entirely uh, every year. So there's probably some budgets that are lying unused. We should be able to access that and use that. And yes, bringing the corporate sector, a number of American companies have their Indian interest here. Indian companies have their research interests in the US and presence. Bringing them all together, more networking, more brainstorming will definitely lead to joint collaborations, which will really help everyone, the entire ecosystem.
The last question for the Indian university or institution leaders who are listening to us at the moment, what is the best way for them to reach out to IIE in India?
Sure. I mean, we have an email ID. It's connect@iieindia.org. You can go to our website, which is a global website, and go to the India pages as well to look out for us. We also support the Education USA program because the person who is the REAC or the advisor who trains all the other sort of counselors across the country and the region is also based out of the IIE office. So as we're around, we can share data, we can help with consultancies, we can help set up new interesting fellowship and scholarship programs which you can design from start to finish. And of course, if you're a university looking for internationalization opportunities, we can help design, maybe take a delegation from your university to the US, or indeed host a conference where many players can interact with one another and share our best practices and whatever it is we know in this area.
Thanks, Vivek. That's really helpful, and thank you very much for giving us time today. I think there are a number of learnings, and we'll come back with uh, more questions which we'll receive on social. Thank you again.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you, Ashish.